Sometimes the cruelest wounds are the ones people convince you that you deserve. And sometimes it takes just one person to show you the truth. In the frontier town of Mill Creek, Martha runs a small bakery. She spent years believing she's unworthy of love because of her size and her past. Then a mountain man named Caleb walks through her door. He becomes her friend when no one else would. But when the town drags her past into the light, Martha breaks down and apologizes for being herself. Caleb looks her in the eye and says, "You were never the problem. What happens when one quiet act of kindness changes everything?" Before we begin, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The day began the way every day had begun for the past 5 years. In darkness, in silence, and in the familiar rhythm of flour and water and salt. Martha struck a match and lit the lamp in her small kitchen behind the bakery. The flame caught and swelled, casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, her hands reaching for the sourdough starter without thought, her feet finding their path around the work table she'd known since childhood. Outside, Mill Creek still slept. The town of 200 souls, huddled against the Montana cold, bundled in their beds, dreaming whatever dreams frontier people dreamed. Martha didn't know what others dreamed about. She'd stopped asking years ago, stopped wondering, stopped hoping that anyone might wonder about her. The starter bubbled under her fingers, alive and sour-sweet. She measured flour by feel more than sight, added water from the pitcher, began the long work of kneading. Her mother had taught her this, the way the dough should feel, how it would resist at first, then slowly yield, becoming supple and smooth under patient hands. Her mother, gone 5 years this winter. Martha glanced at the shelf above the wash basin where her mother's recipe book sat, its leather cover worn soft from decades of use. Eleanor Brennan, no relation to the gossiping Mrs. Brennan who made Martha's life a particular misery, had filled that book with more than recipes. Between instructions for sourdough and rye, for cinnamon rolls and wheat loaves, Eleanor had written small notes, observations about life, reminders about kindness, little jokes that had made Martha laugh when she was young, before she learned that laughter made you visible. And visibility for someone like her was dangerous. The dough came together under her hands. She shaped it, placed it in the proofing basket, covered it with a clean cloth. Then she started on the rye, then the wheat rolls Mrs. Henderson always bought on Tuesdays. The work filled the hours before dawn. The work kept her hands busy and her mind quiet. By the time pale light touched the mountains east of town, Martha had 12 loaves rising and the ovens heating. She wiped her hands on her apron, not her mother's apron, not yet. She couldn't bring herself to wear that one, and moved to open the front shutters. Mill Creek revealed itself in the grey morning. The main street ran straight through town, wide enough for wagons to pass, rutted from the autumn rains, and now frozen hard. Buildings lined both sides, the general store, the saloon, the doctor's office, the church with its simple wooden cross. At the far end, the blacksmith's forge sat dark and cold. Jacob wouldn't fire it for another hour. Martha's bakery occupied a corner plot her grandfather had claimed 40 years ago. The building was simple but sturdy, log construction with a stone foundation, a wide front window that her father had installed when Martha was 12, back when he thought visibility was good for business. He'd been wrong about that. Visibility was never good for people like Martha. She was a large woman. There was no polite way to frame it, no gentle word that made it easier. She'd been a normal child, her mother always said. But after her father died when she was 19, grief had settled into her bones and brought weight with it. Year by year, pound by pound, until the woman in the mirror was someone Martha barely recognized. The town noticed. Of course they noticed. Mrs. Brennan noticed first and loudest. She'd taken it upon herself to remind Martha at every opportunity that gluttony was a sin, that no man would want a woman who couldn't control herself, that Martha was a poor example for the young girls of Mill Creek. Others were quieter about it, but no less aware. The way conversations stopped when Martha entered the general store. The way eyes slid away from her on the street. The way men spoke to her with careful courtesy that had nothing warm in it. The way women smiled with mouths but not eyes. Martha had learned to move through town like a ghost. Present but unseen. Necessary but unwanted. The bakery helped. People needed bread, needed it regular and reliable. So they came to her shop, paid their coins, took their loaves and left. Some were kind. Reverend Shaw always asked how she was keeping, though she never told him the truth. Some were neutral, most of the men, who cared more about whether the bread was fresh than who baked it. And some were cruel in small cutting ways, like Mrs. Brennan, who never missed an opportunity to comment. Still making sweets, Martha? Don't you think you've had enough? Or charging full price today, are we? Seems greedy for someone in your position. Martha never responded. She'd learned that responding only encouraged more. She took the money, handed over the bread, and waited for them to leave. Young Tommy was different. The boy was 11, all elbows and earnest eyes, and he treated Martha like she was normal. He'd come in after school sometimes, drawn by the smell of fresh cookies, and Martha would slip him one when his mother wasn't looking. He'd talk to her about his day, about the creek where he caught frogs, about his dreams of becoming a blacksmith like Jacob. "You're nice, Miss Martha," he'd said once, chocolate smeared on his chin. "Mama says you're sad, but I think you're nice." Martha had turned away so he wouldn't see her eyes water. "You're nice too, Tommy." She didn't have many moments like that. Mostly she had the work, the rhythm of it, the reliability of flour and water transforming into something nourishing, something necessary. Her hands knew what to do, even when her heart had forgotten how to hope. The morning customers began arriving around 7. Mr. Peterson, who ran the general store, bought 3 loaves of wheat to sell in his shop. Mrs. Henderson collected her Tuesday rye rolls, counting out exact change from a small coin purse. Jacob the blacksmith grabbed a dark loaf, still warm, and ate half of it standing in her doorway, crumbs in his beard. "Good as always, Martha," he said, which was the closest thing to a compliment she usually got. By noon, most of the baking was done. Martha cleaned the work tables, fed the sourdough starter, and set dough for tomorrow's loaves. The bakery smelled of yeast and warmth, of cinnamon and salt. It smelled like her mother, like home. She made herself a simple lunch, bread and cheese, an apple from the barrel in the cellar. She ate standing at the work table, looking out the window at the town. Life moved past her window. Children playing in the street, women carrying baskets, men heading to and from work. A whole world she was part of, but separate from. The afternoon stretched long and quiet. A few customers trickled in. Martha sold a cinnamon loaf to Mrs. Shaw, the Reverend's wife, who always smiled warmly, but never stayed to talk. Sold day-old bread at half price to the widow Cooper, who counted pennies and thanked Martha 3 times. By evening, the light was failing and the temperature dropping. Martha locked the front door, banked the ovens, and climbed the narrow stairs to her living quarters above the shop. 2 rooms, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and dresser, a sitting room with a chair, a small table, a wood stove. The same rooms her mother had lived in, the same rooms her grandmother had lived in before that. 3 generations of women, baking bread, living small, careful lives. Martha lit a fire in the stove and settled into the chair with her mother's recipe book. She did this most nights, opened the book, read the recipes she knew by heart, traced her mother's handwriting with careful fingers. Tonight, she found the page for cinnamon rolls. Her mother's notes filled the margins. Double the cinnamon, don't be shy, and best made with love and shared with friends. Friends. Martha closed the book gently. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a friend. Before Samuel, maybe. Back when she was young and still believed that being kind and working hard would be enough. Before she learned that the world had already decided what she was worth, and nothing she did would change their minds. Samuel. She didn't let herself think about him often. It hurt too much, even after all these years. They'd planned to marry. She'd been 22, still grieving her father, but beginning to hope again. Samuel worked at the mill, had kind hands and a gentle voice. He'd courted her properly, brought her wildflowers, told her she was beautiful. Then her grief weight had come, pound by pound, month by month. and Samuel's visits had grown less frequent. His compliments had stopped. His eyes had started sliding away from her the same way everyone else's did. When he left, took a job in another town without saying goodbye, Martha had understood. Of course he left. Why would anyone stay? The town had watched it happen, had whispered about it, had confirmed what Martha already suspected. She was the problem. She'd always been the problem. Martha set the recipe book aside and stared into the fire. Tomorrow would be another day of the same. Rising in darkness, baking bread, serving customers who needed her product but didn't want her presence. Going to bed alone, waking alone, living a life that felt more like existing than living. But this was what she deserved. This was what someone like her could expect. The fire crackled. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. Winter was coming, hard and cold like every winter before it. Martha didn't know that tomorrow would be different. Didn't know that a man would walk through her door and see something in her that she'd forgotten was there. Didn't know that everything she believed about herself was about to be questioned by someone who had no reason to lie. She only knew the cold, the dark, and the familiar weight of loneliness that had become her constant companion. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent, covering Mill Creek in white. The cold came early that November morning, sharp enough to make Martha's breath fog in the bakery, even with the ovens burning. She'd been up since 4, hands deep in dough, mind wandering the familiar paths it always wandered, recipes, measurements, the endless quiet of her own company. She was pulling the first loaves from the oven when she heard the door open behind her. "Be right with you," she called, not turning around. Customers knew to wait. They always waited, never eager to engage more than necessary. "No hurry." The voice was unfamiliar. Deep, quiet, with a roughness to it like wind over stone. Martha set down the bread paddle and turned. The man standing in her doorway was unlike anyone she'd seen in Mill Creek in years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a heavy coat that had seen hard use. His beard was full and dark, shot through with grey. His face was weathered in the way faces got when they spent more time under open sky than under roofs. He was somewhere in his 40s, she guessed, though the years sat on him in a way that made age hard to pin down. But it was his eyes that caught her. Brown, steady, and looking directly at her without the usual slide away, without the usual judgment. Martha's hands went automatically to her apron, smoothing it though it didn't need smoothing. "What can I get you?" "Whatever's fresh." He moved further into the shop and Martha noticed he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. "Smelled your baking from the street. Been on the trail for 2 days. Haven't had real bread in longer than that." "The sourdough just came out." Martha moved to the cooling rack, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Or I have rye, if you prefer something heartier." "Sourdough sounds fine." She wrapped a loaf in brown paper, tied it with string, set it on the counter. 20 cents. He counted out the coins, his hands scarred and calloused. Working hands. When he picked up the loaf, he held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, then lifted it close and breathed in. His eyes closed briefly. "Smells like home," he said quietly. Then, as if realizing he'd spoken aloud, he cleared his throat. "Thank you, ma'am." "You're welcome." He was halfway to the door when he paused. "You open every day?" "Every day but Sunday." He nodded as if filing this information away and left. Martha stood behind the counter, staring at the door long after it closed. The whole interaction had lasted perhaps 2 minutes, but something about it left her unsettled. He'd looked at her, really looked, the way you look at another person, not the way you look at something you'd rather not see. She shook her head. Foolish. He was just a customer, probably passing through town, be gone by tomorrow. But the next morning he came back. "Morning," he said, stamping snow from his boots just inside the door. "Got any of that sourdough left?" "Just pulled it from the oven." Martha wrapped a loaf, trying not to show her surprise. "You're still in town. Took a room above the saloon. Figure I'll winter here, if the work holds out." He paid for the bread. "Name's Caleb, by the way. Caleb Thorne." "Martha. Good to meet you, Martha." He tipped his head in a gesture that was almost old-fashioned, courtly even, and left. The third morning, he bought sourdough again and mentioned he'd found work at the mill, filling in for a man who'd broken his arm. The fourth morning, he asked if she made cinnamon rolls. Wednesdays and Saturdays, Martha said. I'll remember that, and he did. That Saturday, he arrived just as she was setting out the cinnamon rolls, still warm and glazed. He bought two, ate one, standing at her counter, his eyes closing in something close to bliss at the first bite. My wife used to make these, he said, then stopped, as if he'd revealed more than he meant to. Martha didn't know what to say. In 5 years, no customer had ever told her anything personal. She settled on, I hope they're as good. Close enough to hurt, he said, which was honest in a way that made Martha's throat tight. He finished the roll, carefully folded the paper from the second one, and tucked it in his coat pocket. Thank you, Martha. By the second week, his visits had settled into a pattern. Every 3 days, sometimes 4, he'd come in for bread and whatever else she had fresh. He didn't talk much, but he was never rude, never in a hurry. Sometimes he'd comment on the weather. Sometimes he'd mention something from the mill. Once he told her about the cabin he was staying in, 5 miles up the mountain trail, said it had a good view of the valley. Martha found herself looking forward to his visits in a way that frightened her. This was dangerous. Getting used to kindness was how you got hurt. But Caleb seemed unaware of the danger. Or maybe he just didn't care. He treated her the same way he treated everyone, with a quiet respect that expected nothing in return. The town noticed, of course. Who's the big fellow buying bread from you? Mr. Peterson asked one afternoon, his tone carefully neutral. A customer. Heard he's living up on the mountain. Mountain man type. Mr. Peterson counted out coins for his weekly order. You be careful, Martha. Men like that you never know. Martha didn't respond. What could she say? That Caleb had never been anything but respectful? That he was the only person in 5 years who'd looked her in the eye without flinching? Mr. Peterson wouldn't understand. Nobody would. Mrs. Brennan was less subtle. She came in one morning just as Caleb was leaving, timing it that way on purpose, Martha suspected. Well, well, Mrs. Brennan said loudly enough for Caleb to hear. Making friends, are we, Martha? Caleb paused at the door, glanced back. His eyes went from Mrs. Brennan to Martha, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger exactly, more like recognition. Like he understood exactly what was happening. He tipped his head to Martha, ignored Mrs. Brennan entirely, and left. Mrs. Brennan sniffed. That man has been buying bread from you for 2 weeks. People are starting to talk. People always talk, Martha said quietly. Yes, well, they have reason to, don't they? Mrs. Brennan's smile was sharp. A woman in your position can't afford more scandal. Martha handed over the bread Mrs. Brennan had come for, took her money and said nothing. What was there to say? Mrs. Brennan was right. Martha couldn't afford scandal. She could barely afford existence. That evening, as Martha was closing up, she found a small object on her counter near the door. A bird carved from a piece of pale wood. It was simple but detailed. You could see the texture of feathers, the curve of the beak. It fit in the palm of her hand, smooth and surprisingly light. There was no note, no explanation, but Martha knew who'd left it. She turned the bird over in her hands, tracing the careful cuts of the knife that had shaped it. Someone had spent time on this, had thought about it, planned it, made it with intention. For her, Martha's eyes burned. She set the bird carefully on the shelf next to her mother's recipe book and locked the door. That night, lying in bed, she could see the small carved bird from where she lay. In the dim light from the dying fire, it looked almost alive, like it might spread its wings and fly. She thought about what Caleb had said when he gave her the first loaf. Something beautiful people overlook. Martha closed her eyes. She wouldn't let herself hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope was what got you hurt. But the bird sat on her shelf anyway, small and impossible and real. Outside, the wind howled down from the mountains, and winter settled deeper into Mill Creek. The days shortened as November gave way to December. The cold pressed down on Mill Creek like a heavy hand, and people hurried through their business, eager to get back to their fires. Martha's Bakery became one of the few warm refuges in town, and customers lingered a bit longer than usual, drawn by the heat of the ovens and the smell of bread. Caleb's visits continued, regular as clockwork. every 3 days, sometimes with a few extra hours if the weather was particularly bad. He never mentioned the carved bird, and Martha never asked about it, but something had shifted between them. Not friendship exactly, Martha didn't know how to name it. But there was an ease now, a comfort in the silence they shared. One morning in mid-December, Caleb arrived covered in fresh snow, his beard white with it. He stamped his feet and brushed off his coat before coming inside. "Bad out there?" Martha asked, wrapping his usual sourdough. "Getting there. Snow's coming down steady now." He accepted the bread, but instead of leaving immediately, he leaned against the counter. "Mill's shutting down for a week. Ice on the wheel. That's hard. It's the season." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Gives me time to work on the cabin. Needs a new roof before the deep snows come." Martha nodded, not sure what to say. She still wasn't used to people telling her things, sharing pieces of their lives like it was normal. "Your mother taught you to bake?" Caleb asked, nodding toward the shelf where the recipe book sat next to the carved bird. "Yes, she taught me everything." Martha's hand stilled on the counter. "She used to say bread was honest. You can't fake it. Either you put in the work or it doesn't rise." Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Martha surprised herself by continuing. "She ran this place alone for 20 years after my father died. People respected her. She didn't take any nonsense, but she was kind. You're like her, then." Martha's head came up sharply. "No, I'm nothing like her." Caleb's expression didn't change. "That's so. She was strong. She didn't let people push her around. And you do." The question was gentle, but it landed hard. Martha felt her face heat. "That's different." "How?" "Because she was—" Martha stopped, not sure how to finish. "Because she was worthy of respect. Because people liked her. Because she wasn't broken the way I am." Caleb waited. But when Martha didn't continue, he just nodded. "Well, from where I stand, you get up every morning before dawn, bake bread for a whole town, keep a business running, and do it all alone. Seems strong to me." He said it simply, like he was commenting on the weather. Then he picked up his bread and left, the bell over the door chiming softly behind him. Martha stood frozen behind the counter. No one had ever called her strong. Not in years. Not since before Samuel left. She'd been called many things, lazy, gluttonous, pitiable, but never strong. She didn't know what to do with the word. It sat in her chest, warm and uncomfortable, like something she wasn't allowed to keep. The next time Caleb came in, he brought something with him. A small pouch of coffee beans, the good kind that Mr. Peterson sold for premium prices. "Thought you might like these," Caleb said, setting them on the counter. "Seem like the type who appreciates a good cup of coffee." Martha stared at the pouch. "I can't accept this." "Why not?" "Because She struggled for words. "Because you already paid for your bread." "This isn't payment. It's a gift." Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. "People are allowed to give each other gifts, Martha, but I don't have anything to give you back. Didn't ask for anything back." Martha's hands twisted in her apron. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Kindness without explanation. Gifts without strings. It made no sense, and things that made no sense were always traps. But Caleb was already moving toward the door. "Enjoy the coffee," he said, and left before she could protest further. That evening Martha ground the beans and brewed a cup. The smell alone was rich enough to make her close her eyes. When she tasted it, it was better than anything she'd had in years. She sat by her fire, cradling the cup, and tried not to think about what it meant that someone had noticed the things she liked. Tommy came by the next afternoon, red-cheeked from the cold. "Hey, Miss Martha. Smells extra good in here today. Fresh gingerbread." She cut him a piece without asking, the way she always did. Tommy took a huge bite and grinned, crumbs in his teeth. "You're the best, Miss Martha. You're easy to please. That man with the beard left something on your step this morning," Tommy said around another mouthful. "Saw him when I was heading to school. He was carrying firewood." Martha went to the door and looked out. Sure enough, there was a neat stack of split wood beside her entrance, enough to last a week at least. "Did he say anything?" Martha asked. "Nope, just stacked it and left." Tommy finished his gingerbread. "He's nice. Helped me and Pa fix our wagon wheel last week. Didn't want any money for it either. Pa said he's an odd one. living up on the mountain like that, but I think he's all right." After Tommy left, Martha stood looking at the firewood. Her own supply was running low. She'd been rationing it, trying to make it last until she could afford to buy more. Somehow Caleb had known, or maybe he'd just noticed. The same way he noticed she liked good coffee. The same way he noticed the carved bird and her mother's recipes and all the small things that made up her life. Martha didn't cry. She'd learned years ago that crying didn't help. But standing there looking at the firewood, at this tangible evidence that someone had thought about her needs, something in her chest cracked just a little. The next time Caleb came by, Martha had a loaf waiting for him. Not his usual sourdough, but a special one she'd made with honey and oats, the kind that took extra time and care. "On the house," she said when he reached for his coins. Caleb looked at the bread, then at her. A slight smile touched his mouth. "Thank you for the firewood. I noticed you were running low, and I noticed I was too." They stood there for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, an acknowledgement, an understanding. Neither of them was used to being noticed. "Your wife," Martha said, surprising herself. "The one who made cinnamon rolls. What happened to her?" Caleb's expression shifted, grew distant. "Fever, 8 years ago. We were living in Colorado. Winter came early, cold like I'd never seen. Rebecca caught sick and never shook it." He was quiet for a moment. "Buried her in March when the ground thawed enough to dig. I'm sorry. Me too." He looked down at the bread in his hands. "We'd been married 5 years, trying for children, but it never happened. After she died, I couldn't stay in that house. Couldn't stay in that town. Packed what I could carry and started walking. And you've been walking ever since, more or less. Work when I need to, move when I want to. The mountains suit me better than people do most days." He glanced up at her. "Until I smelled your bread." Martha's throat went tight. "It's just bread." "No," Caleb said quietly. "It's not." He left then, but Martha stood behind her counter for a long time after, the place where he'd been standing still feeling warm. That evening she pulled down her mother's recipe book and opened it to a random page. Her mother's handwriting flowed across the paper. Sometimes the best recipes aren't about measurements at all. They're about knowing when something's ready, when it needs more time, when to trust your hands over your head. Martha traced the words with her finger. Her mother had been talking about bread, but maybe she'd meant other things too. Outside, the temperature dropped further. Ice formed on the windows. But inside the bakery, with the ovens banked and the day's work done, Martha felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. She touched the carved bird on the shelf, ran her fingers over the smooth wood. Something beautiful people overlook. Maybe, Martha thought, maybe. Christmas came to Mill Creek with a fresh blanket of snow and the sound of church bells ringing across the frozen valley. Martha spent the day alone, as she always did, baking special sweetbreads that she'd sell the day after. She didn't mind the solitude. It was expected, normal. But this year the silence felt different, heavier, like she was missing something she hadn't known she wanted. The day after Christmas, Caleb came by earlier than usual. He had a package wrapped in brown paper tucked under his arm. "Merry Christmas," he said, setting it on the counter. Martha stared at it. "I didn't get you anything. Wasn't expecting anything." Caleb nodded at the package. "Go on, open it." Her hands shook slightly as she unwrapped it. Inside was a book, not new but well cared for. The cover was worn leather, the pages yellowed but intact. "Poetry," she read from the spine. "Emily Dickinson," Caleb said. "Found it in a trade post 3 years ago. Been carrying it since." He shifted his weight, looking almost uncomfortable. "Thought you might like it. You seem like someone who'd appreciate words, put together careful." Martha opened the book at random. The poem on the page was about hope, how it perches in the soul, asks nothing, gives everything. "I can't accept this," Martha said, but her hands were already cradling the book like something precious. "You keep saying that." "Hasn't stopped me yet." Caleb's expression was gentle. "Rebecca loved poetry. After she died, I couldn't read it anymore. Hurt too much. But lately, carrying it around felt wrong too. Like it needed to be with someone who'd value it." He met her eyes. Seems like you're that person. Martha didn't trust herself to speak. She just nodded. Caleb bought his bread and left. Martha sat down behind her counter, still holding the book, and carefully turned its pages. Someone, Rebecca probably, had made notes in the margins. Small observations, questions, connections to other poems. It was intimate, this glimpse into another woman's mind. A woman who'd been loved. A woman who'd been lost. Martha read until the light began to fail. Then she carried the book upstairs and set it on her small table next to her mother's recipe book. Two women, both gone, both leaving pieces of themselves behind in words and recipes and careful notations. That night, Martha wrote her first entry in the margins of the Dickinson book. Just a small note next to the poem about hope. I'm trying to remember what this feels like. January arrived with bitter cold and wind that howled down from the mountains like something alive and angry. The town hunkered down. People ventured out only when necessary, moving quickly between buildings, heads bent against the cold. Caleb's visits became less regular. Sometimes 4 days would pass, sometimes 5. Martha told herself it was the weather. The trail to his cabin would be difficult in this cold. It made sense that he'd stay up there, only coming down when supplies ran low. But she missed him. The admission came reluctantly, late one night, when she was lying in bed listening to the wind. She missed his quiet presence, missed the way he looked at her like she was normal, missed knowing that every few days someone would walk through her door who saw her as a person rather than a problem. When he finally came back after 6 days away, Martha couldn't quite hide her relief. "Worried you'd frozen up there," she said, then immediately regretted it. Too much emotion. Too much truth, but Caleb just smiled. "Takes more than cold to freeze me." Though it was close a few times, he had a new scratch on his cheek, red and angry-looking. "Fell bringing in firewood." "Stupid mistake. You should put something on that." "I will. I mean now. I have salve upstairs." The words were out before Martha could stop them. She never invited people upstairs. Never. But Caleb just nodded. "All right." Martha's hands trembled as she led him up the narrow stairs to her rooms. She was acutely aware of how small the space was, how plain. The furniture was old, the walls bare except for a single picture of her parents. It was the home of someone who'd stopped expecting visitors years ago. If Caleb noticed, he didn't say anything. He sat in the chair by the wood stove, while Martha fetched the salve from her medicine box. "Hold still," she said, and gently dabbed the salve on the scratch. This close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the grey in his beard, the small scar above his left eyebrow. He smelled like pine and wood smoke and cold air. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly. Martha stepped back quickly. "It's nothing." "It's not nothing." His eyes were serious. "Kindness is never nothing." Martha didn't know what to say to that. She put the salve away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the moment. They were alone in her rooms. This man she barely knew, but felt like she'd known forever, and he was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I should let you get your bread," she said. "Martha." Caleb stood slowly. "Can I ask you something?" Her heart hammered. "All right. Why do you hide up here?" "I don't hide." "You do. I've been coming to your bakery for 2 months now. Never seen you anywhere else. Not at the general store, not at church, nowhere." He wasn't accusing, just observing. "You live in this town, but you're not part of it." Martha wrapped her arms around herself. "That's not by choice, isn't it?" Caleb moved closer, but not threatening. "Just present. Seems to me you decided a long time ago that you weren't welcome. Maybe before anyone else decided it for you." "You don't know what you're talking about." Martha's voice came out sharper than she intended. "Maybe not, but I know something about hiding." Caleb's expression was understanding, not judgmental. "After Rebecca died, I spent 3 years not talking to anyone, unless I had to. Convinced myself I preferred it that way. Took me a long time to realize I was just scared." "Scared of what?" "Of caring about someone again. Of being seen again." He paused. "Of hurting again." Martha's throat closed up. She turned away, pretending to adjust something on the shelf. "I should get back to work." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "All right. Thank you for the salve." After he left, Martha stood in her small room and tried not to shake. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. She wasn't hiding by choice. The world had pushed her into this corner, and she was just trying to survive in it. But a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, "What if he's right?" That night she dreamed of her mother. They were in the bakery, kneading bread together the way they used to when Martha was young. Her mother's hands moved surely through the dough, and she was humming something Martha couldn't quite place. "Mama," Martha heard herself say. "I don't know what to do." Her mother looked up, and her eyes were kind but firm. "You know exactly what to do, sweetheart. You're just afraid to do it." "Afraid of what?" "Of finding out you deserve better than this." Martha woke with tears on her face. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind, and thought about Caleb's words. About hiding, about choosing fear over hope. The carved bird sat on its shelf, small and silent. She wondered what it would feel like to fly. February came in cold and stayed that way, but something in Martha had shifted. She couldn't name it exactly, couldn't point to a specific moment when the change occurred, but she noticed it in small ways. She started opening the shutters wider in the morning, letting more light into the bakery. Started humming while she worked. Old songs her mother had taught her. Started looking people in the eye when they came in, really looking, instead of keeping her gaze carefully downcast. Some people didn't know what to make of it. Mrs. Brennan frowned and made comments about pride going before a fall. Mr. Peterson seemed surprised but pleased. Tommy grinned and said, "You seem happy, Miss Martha." Was she happy? Martha wasn't sure, but she was less miserable, and that felt like progress. Caleb noticed. Of course he did. "Something's different," he said one morning, studying her face. "Is it? You look lighter." Martha busied herself with wrapping his bread. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." But he didn't push. He never pushed. That was one of the things Martha was learning about him. He observed, he noticed, but he let her move at her own pace. That afternoon, Martha did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She left the bakery in the middle of the day, locked the door, and walked to the general store. Mr. Peterson looked up in surprise when she entered. "Martha, everything all right?" "Fine. I just need a few things." She moved through the store, gathering items. Coffee for herself, not the cheap kind. A bar of good soap. A new dish towel. Small things, but things she'd been denying herself for years, telling herself she didn't deserve them. Mrs. Brennan was there, examining fabric. She watched Martha with narrowed eyes. Well, treating yourself, Martha?" "Yes," Martha said simply, and moved past her to the counter. Mrs. Brennan wasn't finished. "I suppose with that mountain man buying bread from you so regular, you can afford luxuries now." Martha set her items on the counter. Something in her chest went still and cold. "Caleb pays the same price as everyone else." "I'm sure he does." Mrs. Brennan's smile was knife-sharp. "Though I wonder what else he might be getting for his money." The implication hung in the air, ugly and obvious. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Now, Helen—" "Oh, don't Helen me, Edward." "Everyone's thinking it." Mrs. Brennan turned to Martha. "You really think a man like that is interested in you for your bread? A woman in your position should be more careful. Men like him don't want what you think they want." Martha's face burned. All her newfound confidence drained away in an instant. Of course Mrs. Brennan was right. Of course, Caleb's kindness had to mean something other than what it seemed. Nothing good ever happened to Martha without a catch. She left her items on the counter and walked out of the store. Behind her, she heard Mr. Peterson say, "That was cruel, Helen." But Mrs. Brennan just laughed. Martha made it back to the bakery before the tears came. She locked the door and stood in the middle of her shop, shaking. What had she been thinking? That she could just decide to be different and the world would let her. That Caleb's kindness was real. That she deserved lightness and happiness and small luxuries. She was a fool. The same fool she'd always been. That evening, when Caleb knocked on her door, Martha didn't answer. She sat upstairs in the dark and listened to him knock again, then wait, then finally leave. She didn't open the next day, or the day after that. She stayed in her rooms, staring at nothing, feeling the old familiar weight of shame settle back over her like a heavy blanket. On the third day, there was a different knock, harder, more insistent. Martha! Caleb's voice, firm but not angry. I know you're in there. I'm not leaving until you open this door. She ignored him. He knocked again. Martha, please. Just let me know you're all right. Still, she didn't answer. Fine. His voice was quieter now, but it carried through the door.
I'll just talk out here.
Don't care who hears. Martha closed her eyes. He wouldn't. He couldn't. I heard what Helen Brennan said to you. Tommy told me. He was worried about you. A pause. She's wrong, Martha. Whatever she implied, whatever poison she put in your head, she's wrong. Martha pressed her hand to her mouth. I come here for bread, yes, but I come here for more than bread. His voice was steady, certain. I come here because for the first time in 8 years, I feel like a person again. Because you look at me like I'm someone worth knowing. Because your kindness isn't an act or a performance. It's real. Tears ran down Martha's face. I know you don't believe you deserve good things. I know the world has spent years convincing you that you're the problem. But Martha, his voice broke slightly, you were never the problem. You were never the problem. The words hung in the air between them, separated by wood and fear and years of accumulated pain. Martha stood slowly, walked down the stairs, stood with her hand on the door, not quite able to open it. I'm scared, she whispered, knowing he probably couldn't hear her. But somehow he did. I know. I'm scared too. Of what? Of caring about you and losing you. Of being happy again and having it taken away. Of being seen. A long pause. Of all the things that make us human. Martha opened the door. Caleb stood on her step, snow on his shoulders, his face lined with worry. When he saw her, eyes swollen from crying, face blotchy, hair disheveled, something in his expression gentled. There you are, he said quietly. I look terrible. You look real. He didn't move to come inside, just stood there, waiting, letting her decide. Martha stepped back, opening the door wider. An invitation. Caleb came inside and closed the door gently behind him. They stood in her bakery, the space that had been her refuge and her prison for 5 years, and looked at each other. She said, Martha started. I don't care what she said. Caleb's voice was firm. I care what's true. And the truth is, I've never wanted anything from you except your company, your friendship, He stopped, searching for words. Your presence in the world. That's all. That's enough. Why? The question burst out of Martha, raw and desperate. Why me? Why do you care? Because when I look at you, I see someone who's survived things that should have broken her. Someone who gets up every morning and makes bread for people who don't appreciate it. Someone who's kind to a lonely old mountain man with too much grief and too many miles on him. He took a careful step closer. Because you remind me that good things still exist, that gentleness still exists, that hope isn't always foolish. Martha couldn't breathe. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This, whatever this is. Friendship or more. I don't know how to let someone close without waiting for them to leave. Then we'll figure it out together. Caleb's expression was open, honest. I'm not going anywhere, Martha. Not unless you tell me to. And even then, I'll probably just go sit in your shop and be stubborn about it. Despite everything, Martha felt a laugh bubble up. It came out watery and half-broken, but it was real. Caleb smiled. There, that's better. Is it? It's a start. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Martha said, I closed the bakery for 3 days. I know. People will talk. People always talk. Mrs. Brennan will make it worse. Let her. Caleb's eyes were steady on hers. You can't live your life trying to satisfy people who've already decided to hate you. At some point you have to choose yourself. Choose yourself. The words settled into Martha like seeds in good soil. I don't know how. Start small. Caleb gestured around the bakery. Open tomorrow. Make bread. Live your life. And when someone says something cruel, remember it tells you about them, not about you. It sounded simple when he said it. Martha knew it wouldn't be. Knew that years of shame and self-hatred wouldn't vanish overnight. But maybe she could try. Will you come back? She asked quietly.
Tomorrow?
Every few days, like always. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Martha, you don't look terrible. You look like someone who's been fighting a hard battle. That's different. After he left, Martha sat in her darkened bakery and tried to sort through everything she was feeling. Fear, yes, but under it something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. She thought about Caleb's words, "You were never the problem." What if he was right? What if all these years she'd been carrying shame that didn't belong to her? What if Samuel's leaving wasn't about her worth, but about his inability to love someone through change? What if Mrs. Brennan's cruelty was about her own unhappiness, not Martha's failings? The thoughts were radical, dangerous. They went against everything Martha had believed for 5 years. But they also felt, somewhere deep down, like they might be true. Martha stood and lit a lamp. She pulled down her mother's recipe book and turned to a page near the end, where her mother had written in larger, shakier script, one of the last entries before she died. "My darling Martha," it read, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know something important. The world will try to tell you what you're worth. It will measure you by its standards and find you lacking. Don't listen. Your worth isn't determined by what others think of you. It's inherent. You are valuable because you exist, because you're kind, because you try. Remember that. Remember me. And remember that you come from a long line of strong women who didn't let the world define them. Don't be the first to break that tradition." Martha read the words 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother had known what would happen, what Martha would face. And she'd left this message, this lifeline. You come from a long line of strong women who didn't let the world define them. Martha closed the book and held it to her chest. Tomorrow she would open the bakery, would face the town and Mrs. Brennan's inevitable comments and the whispers that would follow her. But tonight she would sit with her mother's words and Caleb's belief and the tiny, fragile seed of hope that had taken root, despite everything. The carved bird sat on its shelf, wings spread like it was ready to fly. Martha touched it gently. "Not yet," she whispered, "but maybe soon." Outside, the wind died down. The stars came out cold and bright over Mill Creek, and in her small bakery, Martha began to believe, just a little, that she might deserve more than the life she'd been living. It wasn't transformation, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, and sometimes that was enough. March arrived with false promises of spring. The snow melted during the day, revealing the brown, muddy earth beneath, then froze hard again at night. The whole town seemed caught between seasons, unable to decide whether winter was ending or just pausing to gather strength. Martha reopened the bakery. The first morning was hard, walking downstairs, unlocking the door, knowing people would be watching for signs of weakness. But she did it anyway. Made her bread, opened her shutters and waited for customers. They came. Some looked at her with curiosity, some with pity. Mrs. Brennan came in and made a show of examining every loaf before selecting one, her expression suggesting she expected to find something wrong. 3 days is a long time to be closed, Mrs. Brennan said as she paid. People were talking. People always talk, Martha said, echoing Caleb's words. Mrs. Brennan's eyes narrowed. You're different. Am I? Don't get above yourself, Martha. You're still the same person you were last week. Martha looked at her, really looked for the first time in years. Saw a woman who was unhappy, who spread her misery around because it was the only power she had. Saw someone small and scared disguised as someone strong and righteous. You're right, Martha said quietly. I am the same person. I just see myself differently now. She handed over the bread and waited for Mrs. Brennan to leave. The older woman stood there for a moment, mouth working like she wanted to say something else. Then she sniffed and walked out. Caleb came by that afternoon. Martha had been watching for him without admitting it to herself. You opened, he said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. I did. Good. He bought his bread, then hesitated. There's something I want to show you. If you're willing. Show me what? My cabin. It's not far. Hour's walk at most. He read the hesitation in her face. You don't have to. Just thought you might like to see where I live. But if it's too much, I'll come, Martha heard herself say. Caleb's expression brightened. Tomorrow? I could come by around noon. Martha nodded, already regretting her impulsiveness. What was she doing? She didn't go places, didn't leave the safety of her bakery and rooms. But maybe that was exactly why she should go. The next day was clear and surprisingly warm, one of those gift days winter sometimes offered before it let go entirely. Martha closed the bakery at noon and met Caleb outside. He'd brought a walking stick for her, carved from a sturdy branch. "Trail's muddy in places," he explained. "This'll help." They walked in companionable silence out of town and up into the foothills. The path was narrow, winding between pine trees that still held snow on their branches. Martha's breath came harder as they climbed, but it felt good to move, to use her body for something other than standing and kneading. "You all right?" Caleb asked after a while. "Fine, just out of practice. We can rest if you need." "I'm fine," Martha said, and meant it. Her legs ached, and her face was flushed from exertion, but she felt more alive than she had in years. The cabin appeared after about 40 minutes of walking. It was small, built of logs chinked with mud, with a stone chimney and a single window facing the valley. Modest but well kept, with a woodshed to one side and a small cleared area that might be a garden come summer. "It's not much," Caleb said, suddenly seeming embarrassed. "But it suits me." "It's lovely," Martha said, and meant it. The cabin sat in a small clearing, with a view down the valley to where Mill Creek lay tucked among the hills. From here, the town looked peaceful, almost pretty, with smoke rising from chimneys and the church steeple pointing toward the sky. Inside, the cabin was neat and spare. A bed in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs, a fireplace with cooking implements. Shelves lined one wall holding supplies and a few books. A workbench by the window held carving tools and several pieces of wood, in various stages of becoming birds. "You made all these?" Martha asked, picking up a half-finished sparrow. "Keeps my hands busy. Helps me think." Caleb lit a fire in the fireplace. "Coffee?" "Please." They sat at the small table while the coffee brewed. Martha looked around the cabin, trying to imagine living here. The solitude of it, the peace. "Is it lonely?" she asked. "Sometimes." Caleb poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I'm alone up here by choice. In town, I was lonely in crowds." Martha understood that more than she could say. "After Rebecca died, why didn't you stay with people? Why the mountains?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "After the funeral, people kept trying to help. Kept telling me time would heal it, that I'd move on, that Rebecca would want me to be happy." He stared into his coffee. "They meant well, but I couldn't stand it. Couldn't stand people telling me how to grieve, when to stop, who to become after. So you left." "So I left. Thought I'd walk until it didn't hurt anymore." He smiled sadly. "I'm still walking. Does it still hurt?" "Yes, but differently now. The sharp edges have worn smooth. Now it's more like an ache that comes and goes." He looked at her. "You know about that. About loss that changes shape but doesn't leave." Martha nodded. Her father's death, her mother's, Samuel's abandonment, all of them had left marks, had changed her in ways she couldn't undo. "I spent years thinking grief made me less," Caleb said. "Made me broken. But lately I'm thinking maybe it just made me different. And different isn't the same as wrong. How do you get to that place?" Martha asked. "Where different is okay. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think it starts with stopping the fight. Stopping the constant battle to be what you were before the loss. Just accepting that this is who you are now. Changed but still whole." They sat in silence, drinking coffee, while the fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like waves. "Why did you bring me here?" Martha finally asked. Caleb met her eyes. "Because I wanted you to see that there are other ways to live. That hiding isn't the only option. That you could have something different if you wanted it. Different how? However you want." He gestured around the cabin. "This is what I chose. Solitude on my terms, connection when I want it, peace without having to answer to anyone. But your different doesn't have to look like mine. It just has to be true to who you are." Martha thought about her bakery, her small rooms, her careful, quiet life. It had felt like a prison for so long. But maybe it didn't have to be. Maybe she could choose it instead of simply enduring it. "I don't know who I am," she admitted. "Without all the shame and fear. I don't know what's left. Then maybe it's time to find out. They stayed at the cabin for another hour. Caleb showed her his carvings, explained how he chose the wood, how he could see the shape of the bird in the grain before he ever made the first cut. Martha told him about her mother, about learning to bake, about the small joys she found in the work, even when everything else felt dark. When they started back down the trail, the sun was lowering toward the mountains. Martha felt tired but good. Her legs ached in a way that felt earned. Halfway down, Caleb spoke. "Martha, thank you for coming today. Thank you for inviting me. I don't bring people up there. Haven't since I moved in." He glanced at her. "Wanted you to see it, though. Wanted you to know," he paused, searching for words. "Wanted you to know that someone values your company enough to share the things that matter to them." Martha's throat went tight. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When they reached town, Caleb walked her to her bakery door. "I'll see you in a few days," he said. "I'll be here." He smiled and headed toward the saloon where he kept his room in town. Martha watched him go, then went inside and climbed to her rooms. She sat by her window and looked out at Mill Creek as the light faded. Somewhere up in those mountains was Caleb's cabin, a place of solitude and choice, a place where someone had decided what his life would be, instead of letting the world decide for him. Martha thought about her bakery, about her mother's recipes and her own skilled hands, about Tommy's visits and Reverend Shaw's kind greetings, about bread rising in the dark hours of morning, reliable and real. What if she stopped seeing her life as something to endure and started seeing it as something she could shape? The thought was radical, terrifying, full of possibility. Martha touched the carved bird on her shelf. Its wings were spread wide, ready for flight. "Maybe," she whispered to it. "Maybe it's time." Outside, the stars came out one by one, and spring crept a little closer to Mill Creek. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late March. Martha was kneading dough when she heard the mail coach stop outside. She paid it no mind. She never got letters. But 5 minutes later, Tommy burst through the door, slightly out of breath. "Miss Martha, Mr. Peterson asked me to bring this to you." He held out an envelope. "It's a letter." Martha wiped her hands and took it, frowning. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the postmark from Helena. She turned it over in her hands, feeling an irrational stab of dread. "Aren't you going to open it?" Tommy asked, practically bouncing with curiosity. "Later, maybe." Martha set it on the counter. "Want a cookie?" "Always." Tommy's attention immediately diverted to the jar where Martha kept molasses cookies. After he left, Martha stared at the letter for a long time. Finally, she opened it. The handwriting was educated, careful. It began without preamble. "Dear Martha, you probably never expected to hear from me again. I don't blame you. I've spent the last 5 years trying to figure out how to apologize for the way I left. I was young and stupid and scared, and I handled everything in the worst possible way. I'm writing to tell you I'm coming back to Mill Creek. My wife passed away this winter, and I need to make some changes in my life. I thought maybe we could talk. Maybe I could explain things properly. Maybe we could start over if you're willing. I'll arrive sometime in April. I hope you'll see me." With regret and hope, Samuel Martha read the letter 3 times, each time feeling something different. First shock, then confusion, then a strange, hollow feeling she couldn't quite name. Samuel was coming back. Samuel, who had left without a word. Samuel, who had proven that her worst fears about herself were true. Or had he? Martha set the letter down with shaking hands. 5 years ago, this letter would have meant everything, would have been the vindication she desperately needed, proof that she was worth coming back to. Now it just felt complicated. She didn't tell anyone about the letter, not even Caleb when he came by 2 days later. She went about her work, made her bread, served her customers, but the letter sat in her pocket like a stone, heavy and undeniable. A week passed, then another. Martha found herself watching the street, wondering when Samuel would arrive, what she would say, how she would feel. She pulled out the old photograph she kept hidden in her dresser. Samuel and Martha, taken before her father died. She'd been thinner then, smiling at the camera, Samuel's arm around her shoulders. They'd looked happy. Had they been happy? Or had she just been grateful that someone wanted her? Martha couldn't remember anymore. She was closing the bakery one evening when Mrs. Brennan appeared, her face flushed with excitement. "Have you heard?" she said without preamble. "Samuel Harding is back in town." Martha's stomach dropped. "Is he? Arrived this afternoon. Took a room at the boarding house. I heard he's asking about you." Mrs. Brennan's eyes gleamed with malicious interest. "Apparently his wife died, so sad. Though I suppose it's convenient for you." "Convenient? Oh, come now, Martha. Don't play coy. A widower with property showing interest in you. That's the best you can hope for at this point." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Though between you and me, I'd be careful. Men don't usually come back unless they want something." Martha closed the door without responding. Inside, she leaned against it and tried to steady her breathing. Samuel was here, in Mill Creek, after 5 years. She didn't know what to feel, didn't know what to think. The girl she'd been 5 years ago would have been overjoyed, but Martha wasn't that girl anymore. Was she? That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Samuel, about Caleb, about the life she'd been slowly, carefully building. The next morning, Samuel came to the bakery. He looked older. His hair was starting to thin, and there were lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. But he was still handsome in a conventional way, still moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Martha," he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered. "You look well." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was a kind lie, and that meant something. "Samuel," Martha kept the counter between them. "I got your letter. I wasn't sure you would see me. I'm not sure I should." The words came out harder than she intended, but she didn't take them back. Samuel nodded as if he'd expected this. "Could we talk not here? Somewhere private?" Martha thought about it. Thought about the closed bakery, the small rooms upstairs, where she'd cried over him for months. Thought about how dangerous it was to let the past back in. "Tomorrow," she heard herself say. 2 o'clock, here. Thank you, Martha. Thank you." After he left, Martha stood behind her counter and shook. Not with excitement or hope, with something closer to anger. How dare he? How dare he walk back into her life after 5 years and expect her to just, what? Forgive him? Welcome him? Fall back into the role of grateful girl who couldn't believe a man like him would want her. But underneath the anger was something else. A tiny, traitorous part of her that wondered, what if this was her second chance? What if Samuel had changed? What if he really did regret leaving? Really had come back because he realized what he'd lost? That night, Caleb came by. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" Martha almost lied, almost said nothing and sent him away. But she was tired of hiding. "Samuel's back." Caleb went very still. "The one who left?" "Yes, what does he want?" "To talk, to explain." I don't know. Start over, maybe." Martha sank into the chair behind her counter. "He wrote me a letter. Said his wife died. Said he wants to make amends." Caleb's expression was carefully neutral. "What do you want?" "I don't know." Martha looked up at him. "Part of me wants to hear him out. Part of me wants to slam the door in his face. Part of me wants—" She stopped, not sure how to finish. "Wants what?" "Wants him to prove I was wrong about myself. That I wasn't the problem. That he was the one who failed, not me." The admission came out raw and honest. "Is that pathetic?" "No." Caleb sat down across from her. "It's human. We all want proof that we're not as broken as we fear." "Are you angry? That he's back? That you want to see him?" Caleb thought about it. "No, maybe a little scared, but not angry." "Scared of what?" "Of losing you before I ever really had you." He said it simply, without drama. Just truth. Martha's eyes burned. "You're not going to tell me what to do? Would it matter if I did?" "Probably not." "Then I'll just say this. You deserve someone who chooses you. Not someone who comes back when it's convenient. Not someone who needs you. Someone who chooses you fully and freely because they can't imagine doing anything else." He stood. "I hope you remember that tomorrow." After he left, Martha sat in the dark bakery and tried to sort through the tangle of her feelings. Samuel represented her past, all the pain and shame, but also all the hope she used to have. Caleb represented something new, something she didn't quite believe she deserved yet. Tomorrow she would talk to Samuel. would hear what he had to say. But tonight, she sat with Caleb's words, "You deserve someone who chooses you." Did she believe that? Could she believe that? Martha touched the carved bird on her shelf. In the dim light, it looked ready to fly. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know." But somewhere deep inside, past the fear and shame, past the years of believing she was worthless, a small voice answered, "Maybe it's time to find out." The next day felt impossibly long. Martha went through her morning routine in a daze, burning one batch of rolls because she forgot to check them, measuring ingredients wrong twice. By noon, she gave up and simply waited. Tommy came in after school, took one look at her face and said, "Are you sick, Miss Martha?" "No, sweetheart. Just tired. Mama says Samuel Harding is back. She says you two used to be sweethearts." Tommy's young face was curious, but not unkind. "Are you going to be sweethearts again?" "I don't know, Tommy. Do you want to be?" It was such a simple question, one Martha didn't have a simple answer for. "I'm not sure what I want anymore." Tommy considered this with the seriousness children sometimes brought to adult problems. "My pa says you should always pick the person who makes you smile. Says that's how he knew he wanted to marry Mama. She made him smile even when things were hard." After Tommy left, Martha thought about his words. Who made her smile? Samuel used to back before he left. But lately, when she thought about smiling, she thought about Caleb, about his quiet observations, his steady presence, the way he saw her. But Samuel deserved a chance to explain, didn't he? At 2 o'clock precisely, Samuel knocked on the bakery door. Martha had locked it and turned the sign to closed. She let him in, suddenly aware of how intimate this was, just the two of them in her bakery, afternoon light streaming through the windows. "Thank you for seeing me," Samuel said. "I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you." He looked around the bakery. "It looks the same. Smells the same, like coming home." Martha didn't respond to that. She gestured to the small table by the window where she sometimes took her lunch. They sat facing each other, and for a moment neither spoke. "I don't know where to start," Samuel finally said. "The beginning might be good. The part where you left without saying goodbye." He flinched. "I deserve that. I deserve worse than that." He took a breath. "When your father died, and you started, when you changed, I didn't know how to handle it. I was young, 23. I'd never dealt with real hardship before. So you ran. So I ran." He met her eyes. "I told myself I was doing you a favor, that you'd be better off without someone as shallow as me. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared of being with someone who wasn't..." He stopped. "Wasn't thin, wasn't pretty anymore?" Martha's voice was flat. "You can say it, Samuel. We both know that's what you mean. I was going to say wasn't happy. You were drowning in grief, Martha. And I didn't know how to help you, so I left. And I've regretted it every day since." Martha studied him. He looked sincere. Seemed sincere. But then, he'd always been good at seeming sincere. "Tell me about your wife." Samuel's expression shuttered. "Her name was Caroline. We married 3 years ago. He paused. "She was everything I thought I wanted. Beautiful, social, came from a good family. But we weren't happy, not really. She knew it too. When she got sick this winter, one of the last things she said to me was that I should find someone who made me a better person, that she'd never been that for me, and I'd never been that for her. And you thought of me. I never stopped thinking of you." Samuel reached across the table like he wanted to take her hand, then thought better of it. "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm different now. I've grown up, and I want to try again. If you'll let me." It was everything the girl Martha used to be had dreamed of hearing. Samuel contrite and apologetic, asking for another chance. Proof that she'd been worth coming back to. But as she sat there, looking at this man she'd once loved, Martha realized something. She didn't want him anymore. Not because of Caleb, though he was part of it, but because Samuel had never really seen her. He'd seen a version of her that fit what he wanted. When that version changed, he'd left. And now he was back because he'd idealized her in his memory, turned her into something she'd never been. "Samuel," she said slowly, "I spent 5 years believing I was the problem, that you left because I wasn't good enough, wasn't attractive enough, wasn't worthy enough. I let that belief poison everything. My relationship with this town, with myself, with any possibility of happiness. Martha, let me finish. Her voice was steady, calm. Recently, someone told me that I was never the problem, and I'm starting to believe them. Not because they're telling me what I want to hear, but because they see me, really see me. Not some idealized version, not who I was before grief changed me. Me as I am right now. Samuel's face had gone very still. You leaving wasn't about my worth, Martha continued. It was about your inability to love someone through change, to see past the surface, to value someone for more than how they looked. I do value you for more than that. Do you? Because your letter talked about starting over. But starting over means going back to who we were before. And I don't want to be that girl anymore. She didn't know her own worth. She would have taken you back just to prove she was worth coming back to. Martha stood. I'm not her anymore. Samuel stood too. So that's it? You're saying no. I'm saying thank you for coming back. Thank you for apologizing. But no, I don't want to try again. I don't love you anymore. Maybe I never did. Maybe I just loved the idea of being loved. Is this about the mountain man? The one I've heard people talking about? This is about me. Martha's voice was firm. This is about choosing myself for the first time in my life. Samuel's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. That man, he lives in a cabin in the woods. He has nothing. I can offer you stability, Martha, respectability, a real life. And there it was, the truth underneath all the pretty words. A real life? Martha repeated quietly. You mean a life where I'd be grateful you chose me? Where I'd spend every day trying to be worthy of you? Where I'd never quite be enough? She shook her head. That's not a real life, Samuel. That's a prison. You're choosing poverty over security, loneliness over companionship. I'm choosing freedom over obligation, truth over performance. Martha moved to the door and opened it. I'm sorry about Carolyn. I'm sorry you've been unhappy, but I can't fix that for you. And I won't try. Samuel stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his hat and moved to the door. He paused on the threshold. I did care about you, Martha. In my own way. I know you did. But your way wasn't enough. It never was. After he left, Martha closed the door and leaned against it. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was racing. But underneath the fear, underneath the adrenaline, she felt something else. Pride. She'd chosen herself. She'd said no to someone who would have been the easy choice, the safe choice. She'd walked away from the chance to prove her worth to the town, to Mrs. Brennan, to everyone who'd watched Samuel leave 5 years ago. And she felt strong. Martha looked around her bakery, her space, her work, her life. It wasn't much by the world's standards, but it was hers. And that meant something. She thought about Caleb, probably up in his cabin carving birds. He'd said he was scared of losing her before he ever really had her. As if having someone meant owning them, controlling them, keeping them in a box labeled mine. But that wasn't what Caleb meant. She knew that. He meant being chosen, being seen, being valued enough that someone decided freely and fully to share their life with you. Martha touched the carved bird on her shelf. For the first time, she understood what it represented. Not escape, not flight from something painful, but flight toward something possible. She didn't know what would happen with Caleb, didn't know if whatever was growing between them would bloom into something real and lasting. But she knew one thing. For the first time in 5 years, she was ready to find out. Outside, spring finally arrived in earnest. The last snow melted, crocuses pushed through the mud. Birds returned from wherever they went in winter, filling the air with song. And in her small bakery, Martha began to plan what came next. April transformed Mill Creek from a frozen outpost into something almost lovely. Trees budded green. The creek that gave the town its name swelled with snowmelt, and people emerged from their winter hibernation with the tentative hopefulness of those who'd survived another hard season. Martha threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. She expanded her baking, trying new recipes from her mother's book, experimenting with flavors she'd never dared before. She opened the bakery earlier and stayed later, driven by an energy she'd forgotten she possessed. Caleb noticed, of course. "You're different," he said one morning, watching her package his bread with efficient, sure movements. "Am I? Lighter, like someone opened a window and let the stale air out." He studied her face. "Samuel?" "Gone, back to Helena, I heard." Martha met his eyes. "I told him no." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved. Sad for what could have been if we'd both been different people. But mostly relieved." She handed him his bread. "He wanted me to be grateful he came back. Wanted me to prove I was worth choosing. And you didn't need to prove that anymore." "No," Martha smiled. "I already know I'm worth choosing. I'm choosing myself." Something in Caleb's expression shifted, softened, and intensified at the same time. "Good." They stood looking at each other across the counter, the morning sun streaming through the window, making everything golden. There was something in the moment, something building between them that Martha didn't quite have words for. Before either of them could speak, the door burst open, and Tommy came running in, breathless and wild-eyed. "Miss Martha, there's going to be a town meeting." "Tonight!" Martha's stomach dropped. "What kind of meeting?" "Mrs. Brennan called it. She's saying—" Tommy glanced at Caleb, suddenly looking uncomfortable. "It's all right, Tommy. What's she saying?" "She's saying the town needs to discuss moral character. She's saying you're—" He stopped, his young face pained. "She's saying bad things about you and Mr. Thorne, saying you're corrupting the youth of Mill Creek, me specifically." Caleb's expression went dark. "That woman! No!" Martha's voice was surprisingly steady. "Let her have her meeting. Let her say what she wants to say. Martha, I'm going to attend." She looked at Caleb. "And I'm going to speak. You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do." Martha felt something crystallize inside her, hard and clear as ice. "I've let people like Mrs. Brennan define me for 5 years. I've accepted their judgment, carried their shame, believed their lies. Not anymore." Tommy looked between them, his eyes wide. "You're really going to go?" "I am." Martha squeezed his shoulder. "And you don't need to worry. Whatever Mrs. Brennan says about me, it doesn't change who I am. And it doesn't change that you're a good boy, who I'm honored to call my friend." After Tommy left, reluctantly, with many backward glances, Caleb moved around the counter. He didn't touch her, but he stood close, and Martha could feel his presence like a warm fire. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I know, but I need to." She looked up at him. "I need to do this for myself. Not to prove anything to them, but to prove to myself that I can stand up and say the truth without apologizing for it." "What truth?" "That I'm not ashamed anymore. That I'm done letting them make me small." Martha took a deep breath. "That I deserve kindness and friendship, and maybe even love, and I don't need their permission to believe that." Caleb's eyes were intense on hers. "You do deserve those things. I'm starting to believe that." "Good." He stepped back, giving her space. "But Martha, I'll be at that meeting. I won't speak unless you want me to, but I'll be there. You're not as alone as you think." After he left, Martha closed the bakery for the afternoon. She went upstairs and stood in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, really looking at herself, for the first time in years. She was a large woman. That hadn't changed. Probably never would. Her face was round, her body heavy. By the world's standards, by Mrs. Brennan's standards, she was failing at being a woman. But as she looked at herself, Martha tried to see what Caleb saw, what Tommy saw, what her mother would have seen. She saw strong hands that made bread to feed a whole town. She saw kind eyes that had cried, but hadn't gone hard. She saw someone who'd survived loss and cruelty and loneliness, and who was still here, still standing, still trying. "You deserve to take up space," she told her reflection. "You deserve to exist without apologizing." The words felt strange in her mouth, foreign, but she said them again anyway. "You deserve to exist without apologizing." Again, "You deserve to exist without apologizing." By the 10th repetition, they started to feel almost true. That evening, as the sun lowered toward the mountains, Martha put on her mother's apron, the good one, the one she'd been saving for an occasion that mattered. She brushed her hair and pinned it carefully. She looked at herself one more time. Then she walked to the church where the meeting was being held. The building was packed. It seemed like the whole town had turned out, drawn by the promise of scandal and drama. Martha stood at the back for a moment, watching people file in. Most avoided her eyes. Some looked at her with pity. A few, very few, offered small smiles of encouragement. Reverend Shaw was standing near the front, looking uncomfortable. When he saw Martha, he made his way through the crowd to her side. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly. "I can tell everyone you're ill. Thank you, Reverend. But I'm going to stay. Helen Brennan has no authority to call meetings like this. This isn't official church business. I know. But she called it anyway, and people came. So I'm going to speak." Martha looked at him. "Will you let me?" He studied her face, then nodded slowly.
"I will."
Martha found a seat near the front, feeling eyes on her with every step. She kept her head up, her shoulders back. She wore her mother's apron like armor. Caleb was there, standing against the back wall. He met her eyes across the crowded church and gave her the smallest nod. "I'm here." Mrs. Brennan called the meeting to order with obvious relish. She stood at the front, her face flushed with righteous indignation. "Thank you all for coming. I've called this meeting because I believe Mill Creek is at a moral crossroads. We are a God-fearing community, built on strong values and decent behavior. But lately, those values have been threatened." She looked directly at Martha. "We have allowed immoral behavior to flourish in our midst. We have turned a blind eye to impropriety. We have let our children be exposed to corrupting influences." Mrs. Brennan's voice rose. "I speak, of course, of the relationship between Martha Brennan, no relation to me, I thank God, and the stranger who calls himself Caleb Thorne." Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some agreeing, some uncertain. "This man appears from nowhere, lives like a hermit in the mountains, and attaches himself to a vulnerable woman. A woman who, I might add, has already proven herself to be of questionable character, having driven away one decent man through her own failings." Martha's face burned, but she didn't look away. "And now," Mrs. Brennan continued, building to her crescendo, "he spends time alone with her, gives her gifts, corrupts the youth of our town, young Tommy specifically, by making friendship with her seem acceptable, normal." She looked around the room. "I ask you, is this the example we want to set? Is this the kind of behavior we condone?" Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Then Martha stood. Every eye in the church turned to her. She could feel their judgment, their curiosity, their anticipation of her humiliation. Mrs. Brennan looked triumphant. Martha walked to the front of the church. Her legs shook, but she kept moving. When she reached the front, she turned to face the congregation. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. This was everyone who'd watched Samuel leave. Everyone who'd whispered about her. Everyone who'd treated her like a problem for 5 years. Then she found Caleb's face in the crowd. Found Tommy, sitting with his parents, his young face anxious. Found Reverend Shaw, patient and encouraging. And she found her voice. "Mrs. Brennan is right about one thing," Martha began. "There is immoral behavior in this town. But it's not mine," Mrs. Brennan sputtered. "How dare you? I'm not finished." Martha's voice was steady, stronger than she'd expected. "For 5 years I've listened to you tell me what I am, what I'm worth, how I'm failing. I've carried your shame like it was mine. I've believed your lies about me." She looked around the room, meeting eyes that tried to slide away. "When my father died, I was 19 years old. I gained weight because grief does things to your body that you can't always control. And Samuel Harding left because he couldn't love someone who'd changed. That was his failure, not mine. But I let all of you convince me it was my fault." Several people shifted uncomfortably. Martha pressed on. "I've run this bakery for 5 years. I've provided bread for this town every single day, except Sundays, and the 3 days in February, when I had to remind myself I was human enough to break down. I've been kind to your children. I've given day-old bread to people who couldn't afford fresh. I've done my work honestly and well. No one's questioning your work," Mr. Peterson started. "Yes, you are. You're questioning everything about me because Mrs. Brennan told you to." Martha turned to Mrs. Brennan. "You asked if my friendship with Caleb is the example we want to set. I ask you, what example are you setting?" Mrs. Brennan's face went red. "I am protecting this community. You're protecting your own need to feel superior to someone. You're using morality as a weapon to hurt people who threaten you. And I threatened you because I exist in a body you don't approve of, living a life you think I don't deserve. The silence in the church was absolute. Martha's voice grew quieter, but somehow it carried better. Caleb Thorne is a good man. He's kind and honest and treats me with respect. He's never been inappropriate. He's never asked anything of me. He's simply been my friend when no one else would be. And you want to condemn that because it doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable behavior. She looked at Tommy. And Tommy, sweet, kind Tommy, you've labeled as corrupted because he treats me like a human being, because he sees past my size to my character. You're teaching him that kindness is wrong, that friendship with someone different is immoral. What kind of lesson is that? Tommy's mother was crying quietly. His father had his arm around her, and his face was troubled. Martha turned back to the congregation. I'm done apologizing for existing. I'm done accepting your judgment as truth. I'm a woman who takes up space in this world. I have value, I have worth, and I have the right to live without constantly defending myself against your cruelty. Her voice broke slightly on the last word, but she pushed through. So yes, Mrs. Brennan, there is immoral behavior in this town. It's the way you've treated me. It's the way you've used God and morality to justify your need to feel superior. It's the way you've taught your children that some people are worth less than others based on how they look. Martha took a deep breath. I won't carry your shame anymore. It was never mine to begin with. She walked back to her seat and sat down. Her whole body was shaking, but she kept her head up. The silence stretched. Then from the back of the church, Caleb began to clap. Slowly, deliberately, Tommy joined him. Then Tommy's father, then Reverend Shaw. One by one, people throughout the church began to clap. Not everyone. Mrs. Brennan stood rigid with fury, and several of her close friends remained seated and silent. But enough. More than enough. Mrs. Brennan tried to regain control of the meeting, but Reverend Shaw stepped forward. I think we've heard enough, he said firmly. This meeting is over. Thank you all for coming. People filed out slowly, some stopping to speak to Martha, others hurrying past with averted eyes. Tommy launched himself at her, hugging her fiercely. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, he whispered. Thank you, sweetheart. After most people had left, Caleb made his way to her side. He didn't say anything, just stood there, solid and present. Martha looked up at him. I did it. You did. I'm still shaking. That's all right. Brave doesn't mean unafraid. They walked out of the church together into the soft spring evening. The sky was purple and gold, the air finally warm enough that Martha didn't need a shawl. What happens now? She asked. Now you go home, sleep, wake up tomorrow and make bread. Caleb glanced at her. And you keep living your life without apology. Will it get easier? I don't know. But I think it might get better. They reached her bakery. Martha paused at the door, then turned to face him. Thank you. For being there, always. Caleb's expression was serious. I meant what I said about being scared, about losing you. But tonight, watching you stand up there, he shook his head. You don't need me to save you, Martha. You saved yourself. Maybe I needed both. To save myself and to have someone believe I was worth saving. Something passed between them then, unspoken but understood. The space between them felt charged, full of possibility. I should go in, Martha said. You should. Neither of them moved. Then Caleb reached out and gently took her hand. Just held it, his calloused palm warm against hers. You were magnificent tonight, he said quietly. And for the first time in 5 years, when someone called her something good, Martha believed it. The weeks following the town meeting brought changes Martha hadn't expected. Some people avoided her more than before, uncomfortable with having witnessed her truth. But others, more than she would have thought, began treating her differently, warmer, like maybe they'd seen something in her that night that changed their minds. Mrs. Henderson stopped counting out exact change and started asking about Martha's day. Jacob the blacksmith mentioned he'd always thought Helen Brennan was too harsh. Mr. Peterson quietly suggested Martha consider expanding her bakery, maybe adding a few tables and chairs. People might like a place to sit and have coffee, he said. Talk a bit. Community space, you know. Martha thanked him but didn't commit. She was still processing everything that had happened, still getting used to moving through the world without the constant weight of shame. The biggest surprise came from Tommy's mother. She appeared at the bakery one morning, nervous and apologetic. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for being kind to Tommy, and for what you said at the meeting. My mother was heavy like you. I remember how people treated her, how it hurt her, how it hurt me watching it." She blinked back tears. "I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." "It's all right," Martha said, and found she meant it. "It's not, but I'm speaking up now. Helen Brennan doesn't speak for all of us." She squared her shoulders. She never did. Mrs. Brennan herself was noticeably absent. Martha heard she'd taken to shopping in the next town over, 20 miles away. The rumor was she couldn't stand seeing Martha walk around acting like she'd done something admirable instead of merely making a scene. Martha found she didn't care. Mrs. Brennan's opinion had lost its power over her. Caleb's visits continued, but something had shifted between them. The air felt different when he was near, charged somehow, full of things unsaid but deeply felt. They didn't talk about it, didn't name it, but it was there, growing like bread dough in a warm place. One afternoon in early May, Caleb came by with a proposal. "I'm fixing up the old Fletcher place," he said. "Bought it last week. Thought I might try settling in town properly. 20 minutes from here, like I mentioned before." Martha's heart did something complicated. "You're staying?" "If that's all right with you." "Why wouldn't it be?" Caleb looked at her steadily. "Because I'm staying for you, Martha. And I wanted to make sure that was something you wanted before I committed to it." The honesty of it took her breath away. "You don't have to change your life for me. I'm not changing it for you. I'm changing it because of you. There's a difference." He set down the bread she'd just handed him. "These past months, you've reminded me what it feels like to be part of something, to care about someone, to want to build a life instead of just wandering through one." "Caleb, let me finish." His voice was gentle but firm. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just want you to know that I'm choosing to be here, choosing proximity to you. Choosing a life where maybe, if you want it too, we could build something together, slowly, carefully, in whatever way feels right." Martha couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Here was everything she'd stopped letting herself want, offered freely and without conditions. "What if I'm not ready?" she managed finally. "Then I'll wait." Caleb smiled. "I've got time. And a house to fix up. That'll keep me busy. What if I'm never ready? Then I'll still be here. Still your friend. Still coming by for bread and conversation." He picked up his package. "I'm not going anywhere, Martha. Not unless you tell me to. And maybe not even then." After he left, Martha stood in her bakery and cried. Not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming relief of being chosen. Freely, fully, without expectation or obligation. Caleb was staying. For her, because of her. Not because she'd earned it or proven herself worthy, but simply because he wanted to be near her. That night, Martha pulled down her mother's recipe book and opened it to the last page. Her mother's final entry, written in shaky script just days before she died. "My darling girl, if you're reading this, I've gone on ahead. Don't grieve too long. Don't let the world make you small. You come from a long line of women who knew their worth, who claimed their space, who loved fiercely and demanded to be loved in return. Be one of those women. Don't settle. Don't shrink. Don't apologize for the room you take up. You are my legacy, and you are enough. You have always been enough. Remember that when the world tries to tell you otherwise." Martha read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she took out a pen and added her own note below her mother's. "I'm finally starting to believe you, Mama. I'm starting to understand that I was never the problem. I'm starting to build a life where I don't apologize for existing. I'm starting to let someone see me, really see me, without waiting for them to leave. It's terrifying, but it's also the most alive I've ever felt. Thank you for teaching me that I deserve this. Thank you for believing I was enough when I couldn't believe it myself." She closed the book gently and set it on the shelf next to the carved bird. 2 artifacts of love. One from her past, one from her present, both reminding her that she was worth staying for. Outside, Mill Creek settled into night. Stars emerged, bright and cold. Somewhere up on the mountain in his old cabin, Caleb was probably carving another bird by lamplight. And somewhere just outside town, the Fletcher place sat waiting for him to make it home. Martha looked around her small rooms. They'd been her refuge and her prison for 5 years. But maybe they didn't have to be either. Maybe they could just be a place she lived, while she figured out what came next. She touched the carved bird one more time. In the dim light, it almost looked like it was moving. Almost looked like it was ready to fly. "Not yet," Martha whispered, "but soon." And for the first time in as long as she could remember, she went to sleep feeling something that wasn't quite hope, wasn't quite certainty, but was somewhere beautifully in between. Summer arrived in Mill Creek with the kind of warmth that made people remember why they endured the brutal winters. The mountains turned green, wildflowers bloomed in unexpected places, and the creek ran clear and cold with snowmelt. Caleb worked on the Fletcher place every day, transforming it from a weathered wreck into something livable. Martha watched its progress from town, though she didn't visit. Not yet. She was still figuring out what his staying meant, what she wanted it to mean. But she found herself thinking about it more often, about what it might be like to have someone close, someone who chose her, someone who saw all her complicated, damaged parts and stayed anyway. One afternoon in June, as Martha was closing up the bakery, Reverend Shaw stopped by. "Got a minute?" he asked. Of course. They sat at the small table by the window. The Reverend looked uncomfortable, like he had something difficult to say. "I wanted to apologize," he finally began, "for not speaking up sooner. For years, I watched people treat you poorly, and I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere, that you seemed to be managing. But that night at the meeting," he shook his head, "I realized I'd failed you, failed in my duty to protect the vulnerable, to speak truth to cruelty. I'm sorry." Martha was taken aback. "You were always kind to me, Reverend. Kind isn't enough. Kindness without action is just comfortable silence." He looked at her seriously. "You were right about what you said. About how we'd taught Tommy that compassion was wrong, that friendship with you was immoral. That's on all of us who stayed silent. On me especially. Thank you for saying that. I wanted you to know that things are going to change. I've started preaching about radical compassion, about seeing people the way Christ saw them, as valuable simply because they exist. It's made some people uncomfortable." He smiled slightly. "Helen Brennan stopped coming to services. I'm sorry you lost a congregant. I'm not. If my sermons make people who use faith as a weapon uncomfortable, then I'm doing something right." He stood. "I also wanted to tell you that Caleb Thorne spoke to me last week, asked about courting customs, said he wanted to do things properly." Martha's breath caught. He did. Wanted to know if there was a respectful way to express his intentions without pressuring you, without making you feel obligated. The Reverend's expression was warm. "I told him the most respectful thing was to ask you directly what you wanted." After he left, Martha sat alone in her bakery and tried to process this information. Caleb was thinking about courting her. Not just friendship, not just proximity, but an actual formal expression of romantic intent. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. That evening, she decided to finally visit the Fletcher place. It took her 20 minutes to walk there, following the path Caleb had described. The house sat in a small clearing, backed by forest, with a view across the valley. As she approached, she could hear hammering. Caleb was on the roof repairing shingles. He looked up when he heard her coming, and his face lit up in a way that made Martha's chest tight. "Martha!" He climbed down quickly. "I wasn't expecting you." "I know. I should have sent word." "No, I'm glad. I've been wanting to show you, but I didn't want to seem like I was pushing." He gestured to the house. "Want to see inside?" The house was larger than she'd expected. 3 rooms downstairs, 2 up. Caleb had been working hard. The floors were sanded smooth, the walls freshly chinked, the windows fitted with new glass. It smelled of sawdust and possibility. "The kitchen's big," Caleb said, showing her around. "Thought you might appreciate that. Good light in the mornings. And there's a root cellar that just needs some shelving." He was talking faster than usual, nervous. "The upstairs rooms need work, but the downstairs is almost done. Thought I'd take my time with the rest." Martha walked through the space, imagining it furnished, lived in. Imagining mornings here, coffee by the window, evenings by the fireplace, a life. It's beautiful, she said. It will be. Caleb followed her back to the main room. Martha, I need to ask you something. Her heart hammered. All right. The Reverend said I should ask you directly what you want. So I'm asking. He took a breath. What do you want? From me, from this, he gestured between them. I need to know so I'm not making assumptions. So I'm not building something in my head that doesn't match what you're feeling. Martha looked at him, this good, patient man who'd shown her kindness when she'd forgotten she deserved it, who'd seen her value when she couldn't see it herself, who was standing in his half-finished house asking what she wanted instead of telling her what he expected. I want, she started, then stopped. This was hard, being honest about desire when you'd spent years believing you didn't deserve it. She tried again. I want to believe that this is real. That you won't wake up one day and realize you made a mistake choosing me, that I can trust this enough to let myself hope. Martha, I'm not finished. She forced herself to keep going. I want to believe I deserve love. The real kind, not the kind where I'm constantly trying to earn it or keep it. I want to believe that my size, my past, my damage, none of it makes me less worthy of happiness. Caleb's expression was infinitely gentle. What if I told you that you don't have to believe any of that for it to be true? Then I'd say I want to try, to work toward believing it. Martha took a shaky breath. To work toward trusting that someone could want me without an ulterior motive. Good, that's a start. Caleb moved closer, but didn't touch her. Now let me tell you what I want. All right, I want to court you properly. To take you to Sunday dinners and walk with you in the evenings and sit with you in your bakery when the day's work is done. I want to learn all the things about you I haven't learned yet, what makes you laugh, what keeps you up at night, how you take your coffee. His voice was steady, sure. I want to build a life here, close enough to see you every day, but far enough that you have your space. I want time to prove that I'm not going anywhere. He paused, then continued. And someday, not today, not next week, but someday when you're ready, I want to ask you to marry me, to share this house and this life, to wake up every morning knowing you're here, to go to sleep every night grateful you chose me back. Martha's eyes burned with tears. But I know that's a long way off, Caleb said. I know you need time. So for now, I'm just asking if I can court you, if you'll let me show you, slowly and patiently, that you're worth staying for. Martha looked at this man, at this house, at this possibility of a life she'd stopped dreaming about. She thought about all the reasons to say no, fear, doubt, the years of accumulated shame that whispered she wasn't enough. Then she thought about her mother's words. Don't settle, don't shrink, don't apologize for the room you take up. Yes, Martha said. You can court me. Caleb's whole face transformed with relief and joy. Yeah? Yes? Martha laughed, sudden and surprised by her own certainty. Yes, you can court me. And yes, I want to try trusting this. And yes, her voice caught. Yes, I think maybe I might be able to believe I deserve you. Caleb closed the distance between them and very gently took both her hands. You deserve me. You deserve happiness. You deserve love without conditions. He brought her hands to his lips, kissed them softly. And I'm going to spend as long as it takes proving that to you. They stood in the empty house, hands clasped, and Martha felt something inside her shift and settle. Not healed, healing would take time, but opening, softening, allowing the possibility of hope. Can I show you the garden plot? Caleb asked. Thought we could plant herbs, maybe some vegetables. Whatever you'd like. I'd like that. They walked outside into the golden evening light. The garden plot was cleared and ready. Good soil waiting for seeds. Caleb talked about his plans, tomatoes here, herbs there, maybe some squash along the fence line. As Martha listened, she thought about growth, about things that started small and tender but became strong with time and care, about seeds that needed darkness and patience before they could break through into light. Maybe that's what she was doing, breaking through, finally. That night, walking back to town in the warm dusk, Martha felt different. Lighter, like she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her. The carved bird sat on her shelf at home, wings spread. But Martha was beginning to realize she didn't need to fly away from anything, didn't need to escape her life or her town or herself. She just needed to open her wings and let herself be seen. And she was finally ready to try. The summer unfolded in a series of small, perfect moments that Martha tried to hold on to remember, because they felt like the life she'd always deserved, but never believed she could have. Caleb came to the bakery every few days, just like before. But now there was an acknowledged intimacy between them, a courtship that the whole town knew about. Some people smiled when they saw them together. Others frowned. Martha found she cared less and less what others thought. They took walks in the evenings when Martha closed up shop. Never far, around town, out to the meadow where wildflowers grew thick and sweet-smelling. They talked about everything and nothing. Caleb told her about his years in the mountains, the places he'd been, the things he'd seen. Martha told him about her childhood, about learning to bake, about the mother she still missed. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, and that was good too. One evening in July, Caleb brought her to the Fletcher place, his place, though he'd started calling it ours, in a way that made Martha's heart skip, and they sat on the porch he'd just finished building. "I've been thinking," Caleb said, whittling a piece of wood as they watched the sunset. About time. About how much of it we've wasted being afraid." He glanced at her. "I spent 8 years wandering because I was scared to settle, scared to care about anything enough that losing it would hurt. And now I'm more scared of wasting whatever time we have being careful, playing it safe." He set down his knife. "I know I said we'd take our time, that there's no rush, and that's still true. But Martha, I don't want to wait years to ask you what I want to ask you." Martha's breath caught. "What do you want to ask me?" Caleb turned to face her fully. "I want to ask if you'll marry me. Not today, not even this year necessarily, but soon, as soon as you're ready. Because I love you, Martha. I love your strength and your kindness and your terrible habit of apologizing for things that aren't your fault. I love the way you knead bread and the way you laugh when you forget to be careful. I love who I am when I'm with you." Martha couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. "You don't have to answer now," Caleb continued quickly. "Take your time. Think about it. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that this isn't casual for me. That I'm not here because I have nowhere else to be. I'm here because you're here, and that's where I want to be. Caleb, I know you're scared. I know you're still learning to trust this. That's all right. I can wait. I will wait." He took her hand. "Just know that whenever you're ready, my answer will still be yes." Martha looked at this man who'd walked into her bakery on a cold November morning and somehow seen past everything she'd believed about herself. Who'd been patient and kind and honest, even when it would have been easier to lie. "I'm ready," she heard herself say. Caleb's head snapped up. "What?" "I'm ready." Martha's voice grew stronger. "I spent 5 years being small and scared and convinced I didn't deserve good things. But you've shown me different. You've shown me that I'm worth staying for, worth choosing, worth loving. And I believe you. Martha, I love you too." The words came out in a rush. "I love that you're patient but not pitying. That you see my strength instead of my damage. That you carved me a bird because you saw something beautiful people overlook." She squeezed his hand. "He'd love that you're asking me to marry you and I'm saying yes." For a moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then he started to laugh, a deep, joyful sound that Martha had never heard from him before. "Yes?" he asked. "You're saying yes?" "I'm saying yes." Caleb pulled her into his arms and Martha let herself be held. Really held, for the first time in longer than she could remember. She felt his heartbeat against her chest, heard his breath catch with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for choosing me back." They sat on the porch as the sun went down, talking about the future in a way that felt real, rather than hypothetical. They'd marry in the fall, they decided. Small ceremony, just a few people. They'd live here in the Fletcher place, their place now, and Martha would keep running the bakery. Caleb would work at the mill and help her in the mornings when the baking was heavy. "We should tell Tommy first," Martha said, "before anyone else. He deserves to know." Agreed, they told him the next day. Tommy's face lit up like sunrise. "I knew it," he crowed. I told Mama you two were going to get married. Did you now? Martha tried to sound stern but couldn't stop smiling. Yep, I said Miss Martha deserves someone nice, and Mr. Thorne is nice, so they should get married. Tommy looked between them seriously. You're going to be happy, right? Both of you. I think we are, Caleb said, ruffling Tommy's hair. Good. You deserve it, Miss Martha. Tommy hugged her fiercely. You deserve all the good things. Word spread through Mill Creek with the usual speed. Most people were pleased, or at least not actively opposed. Mr. Peterson offered congratulations and suggested Martha might want to hire help for the bakery once she was married. Mrs. Henderson cried and said it was about time Martha had some happiness. Mrs. Brennan predictably had opinions. She made sure everyone knew she thought the whole thing was unseemly, hasty, doomed to failure. Martha heard the gossip third hand and found she didn't care. Reverend Shaw agreed to perform the ceremony and seemed genuinely delighted. Sometimes, he told them, God brings people together in the most unlikely ways. And sometimes the greatest miracles are just people choosing to love each other despite everything. The summer rolled toward autumn. Caleb finished work on the house, making it warm and welcoming. Martha packed up her mother's things, the recipes, the few pieces of furniture, the memories, and prepared to leave the bakery rooms she'd lived in for 5 years. It should have been sad. In some ways it was. Those rooms had been her refuge when everything else fell apart. But they'd also been a prison of her own making, a place where she'd hidden from the world. She was ready to stop hiding. On a crisp September morning, Martha woke in her small room above the bakery for the last time. Tonight, she'd sleep in the Fletcher place in her home with her husband. The word felt strange and wonderful. Husband. After everything, after all the years of believing she'd never have this, here it was. She dressed carefully in a simple dress, new, ordered from the catalogue, made to fit her properly instead of adapted from something meant for a smaller woman. She pinned her hair, looked at herself in the mirror. You deserve this, she told her reflection. You are enough. And for the first time she believed it completely. The ceremony was held in the church, with perhaps 30 people in attendance. Tommy sat in the front row with his parents, grinning so wide Martha thought his face might split. Reverend Shaw performed the service with warmth and joy. Caleb stood at the altar in his one good suit, looking at Martha like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. When Martha walked down the aisle, no one giving her away because she'd given herself, chosen this freely, she felt every eye on her. But instead of shame, she felt something else, pride, relief, joy. She reached the altar and took Caleb's hand. Reverend Shaw spoke about love and commitment, about choosing each other daily, about grace. Then he got to the vows. Caleb, do you take Martha to be your wife to have and to hold from this day forward? I do. Martha, do you take Caleb to be your husband to have and to hold from this day forward? Martha looked at this man who'd seen her value when she couldn't see it herself, who'd been patient and kind and steadfast, who'd told her on a cold winter day that she was never the problem. I do, she said clearly. They exchanged simple gold rings. Caleb's hands shook slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. I now pronounce you husband and wife, Reverend Shaw smiled. You may kiss your bride. Caleb cupped Martha's face gently and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, he whispered, Hello, Mrs. Thorne. Hello, Mr. Thorne. The reception was held at the church hall. People brought food and well wishes. Tommy made a speech that was mostly about how he knew they'd get married all along, and how Miss Martha made the best cookies. Mr. Peterson gave Caleb a bottle of whiskey and told him he was a lucky man. I know, Caleb said, looking at Martha across the room. I know. As the sun set, they left the celebration and walked to their home. Their home. The word still felt new and impossible. Inside, a fire crackled in the fireplace. Caleb had brought fresh flowers and put them on the kitchen table. The house smelled of sawdust and new beginnings. Welcome home, Caleb said. Martha looked around, at the sturdy walls, at the furniture they'd chosen together, at the kitchen where she'd learned to cook for 2 instead of 1, at the life they were building, piece by careful piece. I never thought I'd have this, she said quietly. Neither did I. Caleb came to stand beside her. But here we are. Here we are. They stood in the warm house, in the life they'd chosen. And Martha felt something she hadn't felt in 8 years. Complete. Not because Caleb completed her. She was whole on her own. But because for the first time, she was allowing herself to be fully known and fully loved. And that changed everything. Outside, the stars came out over Mill Creek. The town settled into night. And in the Fletcher place, in the Thorn place now, 2 people who'd both been lost found their way home. Autumn came to Mill Creek with a gentle hand, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red, bringing crisp mornings and warm afternoons. Martha woke each day in her new home, in the bed she shared with Caleb, and had to remind herself it wasn't a dream. Marriage was different than she'd imagined, easier in some ways, harder in others. They had to learn each other's rhythms, when to talk, when to offer silence, how to share space without losing themselves in it. But they approached it with patience, with the understanding that they were both learning as they went. Martha still ran the bakery, still woke before dawn to knead dough and fire the ovens. But now Caleb woke with her some mornings, made coffee while she worked, kept her company in the quiet hours. Other mornings he slept in, and she had her solitude, and both were good. They fell into a rhythm. Breakfast together after the baking was done. Martha at the bakery during the day, while Caleb worked at the mill. Evenings on their porch, watching the sun set over the valley. Nights talking by the fire, or reading in comfortable silence, or simply existing together. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes Martha's old fears surfaced, moments when she looked at Caleb and thought, when will he realize he made a mistake? Sometimes Caleb's grief for Rebecca rose up unexpectedly, and he'd go quiet for a day or two. They learned to give each other space while still being present. Learned that love wasn't about fixing each other's pain, but about bearing witness to it. One October afternoon, Martha was closing up the bakery when Mrs. Brennan came in. Martha hadn't seen her in months, not since before the wedding. "Mrs. Brennan," Martha said neutrally, "what can I get you?" "Nothing. I came to talk." The older woman looked uncomfortable, which was so unlike her that Martha just stared. "All right," Mrs. Brennan twisted her hands together. "I've been doing some thinking about what you said at that meeting, about moral behavior and what I'd been teaching people." Martha waited. "You were right." The words came out stiff, like they hurt. "I've been cruel to you for years. Told myself it was righteous, that I was protecting the community. But I was just—" She stopped, struggled with the words. "I was just unhappy, and miserable people need targets." "Yes," Martha said quietly. "They do. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it." Mrs. Brennan met Martha's eyes. "But I wanted you to know I've stopped. Stopped talking about you, stopped spreading gossip, stopped using faith as a weapon. The Reverend's sermons have made me think. Made me realize I've been wrong about a lot of things." Martha studied her. The woman looked smaller than she remembered, older, tired. "Thank you for telling me," Martha said. "That's it? No acceptance, no forgiveness speech?" "I forgave you months ago," Martha said honestly. "Not because you deserved it, but because I deserved to stop carrying anger around. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen." Mrs. Brennan nodded slowly. "That's fair." She moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it's worth, you were braver than I ever was. Standing up like that, speaking your truth. I've spent my whole life being angry at people who were different, and you spent years being kind, despite having every reason not to be." She looked back. "I hope you're happy, Martha. You deserve it." After she left, Martha stood in her empty bakery and processed what had just happened. Mrs. Brennan had apologized. Actually apologized. It didn't erase the years of cruelty, didn't undo the damage. But it was something, a small shift in the foundation of the world. That evening, Martha told Caleb about it. They were sitting on their porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "How do you feel about it?" he asked. "Strange. Validated, I guess. But also, I realized, I don't need her apology anymore. I've moved past needing anyone's validation but my own." Caleb smiled. "That's growth, is it?" "It is." He pulled her closer. You've come a long way from the woman who couldn't accept a gift without thinking it was a trap. Martha thought about that. About the woman she'd been a year ago, hiding in her bakery, convinced she was the problem, unable to imagine a different life. And the woman she was now, married, loved, beginning to believe in her own worth. "Do you think people can really change?" she asked. "I think people can grow, can become more themselves, can shed the lies they've been told and step into truth." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "You haven't changed, Martha. You've just stopped apologizing for who you are." As winter approached, bringing the promise of snow and cold, Martha found herself thinking about the passage of time. How a year ago, she'd been alone and convinced she always would be. How Caleb had walked into her bakery and somehow seen past everything she'd believed about herself. They were preparing for their first winter together, stacking firewood, preserving food, making sure the house was ready for the cold months ahead. It felt significant, this preparation, like they were building something that would last. One evening in late November, Caleb came home from town with news. "Ran into the owner of the mill today. He's selling, moving to California to be with his daughter." Caleb hung up his coat. "Asked if I'd be interested in buying it." The mill. The whole mill? The whole operation. Building, equipment, water rights. Caleb sat down at the table. "It's a big decision. A big investment. We'd have to take on debt, work longer hours, take a real risk. But," Martha heard the but in his voice, "but it would be ours. We could build something real here. Put down roots that go deeper than just a job." He looked at her. "What do you think?" Martha thought about it. About stability and risk. About building something versus just existing. About the life they were creating together and what it could become. "I think we should do it," she said. "Yeah?" "Yeah, we're not people who play it safe anymore." She smiled. "We're people who choose." They bought the mill in December, signing papers and taking on more debt than Martha had ever imagined. But they approached it the same way they approached everything, together, with patience and care and determination. The town responded with surprising support. Even people who'd been cool to Martha before seemed pleased that the mill would stay open, stay local. Tommy declared that now his dream was to work for Mr. Thorne instead of becoming a blacksmith. As Christmas approached, Martha and Caleb hosted their first dinner. A small affair, Tommy and his parents, Reverend Shaw and his wife, Mr. Peterson and his daughter. 7 people crowded around their table, sharing food and stories and warmth. Martha looked around the table at these people. Some who'd been kind from the start, some who'd needed time to see past their own prejudices. All of them choosing to be here, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. After everyone left, as she and Caleb cleaned up together, she said, "A year ago, I never could have imagined this." "What?" "Any of it. This house, this life, people in our home." She set down the dish she was washing. "You." Caleb dried his hands and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "A year ago, I was living in a cabin, convinced I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Then I smelled your bread and decided to be brave enough to walk through a door. Best decision you ever made." "Second best." He turned her to face him. "The best was when I told you that you were never the problem. Because that's when I saw you start to believe it." Martha thought about that moment, the town meeting, her standing up, Caleb saying those words that changed everything. You were never the problem. She'd built a whole life on believing she was. And in one sentence, Caleb had offered her a different truth, one she'd been slowly, carefully learning to accept. "I love you," she said. "I know I tell you that, but I need you to understand how much I mean it. You didn't just love me. You taught me that I was lovable. That's a gift I can never repay. You don't have to repay it. You just have to keep being exactly who you are." Caleb kissed her gently. "That's all I ever wanted." That night, lying in bed, Martha listened to Caleb's breathing, slow into sleep. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, just like it had a year ago when everything changed. She thought about the carved bird on the shelf downstairs, thought about her mother's words in the recipe book, thought about all the small choices that had brought her to this moment, this bed, this man, this life. She was happy. The realization still felt new and strange. But it was true. Martha closed her eyes and let herself be happy. Let herself be loved. Let herself be exactly who she was without apology or shame. Outside, the snow fell soft and silent, covering Mill Creek in white. And inside, in the warmth of the home they'd built together, two people who'd both been lost slept peacefully, having found exactly what they'd been searching for: each other and themselves. Spring returned to Mill Creek with the inevitability of all seasons, bringing green to the brown earth and warmth to the cold air. The mill reopened under Caleb's management, running smoothly and providing steady work for a dozen men from town. Martha's bakery thrived, and she'd taken Mr. Peterson's suggestion to add a few tables where people could sit with coffee and conversation. The bakery had become something more than a place to buy bread. It had become a gathering spot, a community center of sorts. People lingered there now, talking about their days, sharing news, building connections. And Martha, who'd once moved through town like a ghost, found herself at the center of it all. She was different now, and she knew it. Moved differently, spoke differently, held her head up and met eyes without flinching. The shame that had once weighed her down had lifted, and in its absence she discovered a strength she hadn't known she possessed. One warm April morning, Tommy's mother came into the bakery with news. "I'm opening a dress shop," she said, her face flushed with excitement. "Right next door in the old Cooper place. Custom dresses for women of all sizes." She looked at Martha meaningfully. "Watching you stand up for yourself, watching you refuse to apologize for your size, it made me realize there's a need here. For clothes that fit real women, not some impossible ideal. And I can do that. I can make beautiful things for everyone." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "That's wonderful." "It's because of you," Tommy's mother said. "You showed me that taking up space isn't something to apologize for. That we all deserve to be seen and valued as we are. So thank you." After she left, Martha stood behind her counter and marveled at the ripple effects of choosing yourself. How her standing up hadn't just changed her own life, but had given others permission to do the same. The summer brought changes. The mill prospered. The bakery grew. Martha and Caleb's life together deepened into something comfortable and real, full of small rituals and shared jokes and the kind of intimacy that comes from truly knowing another person. They talk sometimes about children, but without urgency. If it happened, good. If not, they had each other, and that was enough. One evening in late June, they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd maintained through every season. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Martha asked. "If you hadn't walked into my bakery that day?" "Sometimes," Caleb admitted. "I think about how close I came to just passing through town. How I almost didn't stop. What made you stop?" "Honestly, I was tired. Tired of walking, tired of being alone, tired of running from ghosts." He squeezed her hand. "I smelled bread and thought maybe I'd rest for a day or two. Never imagined I'd stay. Never imagined I'd find you. And now I can't imagine being anywhere else." He looked at her seriously. "You saved me, Martha. Just as much as I saved you. Maybe more." Martha thought about that. About two broken people finding each other and building something whole together. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd dreamed about as a girl. It was better, messier, more complicated, more real. "We saved each other," she said finally. "And maybe that's what love is. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to heal together." As summer gave way to autumn again, Martha found herself reflecting on the year that had passed. A year of marriage, of partnership, of learning how to be loved and to love in return. A year of growth and challenge and unexpected joy. One September morning, she woke early and went to the bakery before Caleb was up. She stood in the quiet space, hands deep in dough, and thought about all the mornings she'd done this same work while feeling hopeless and alone. She thought about the woman she'd been, convinced she was the problem, convinced she didn't deserve good things, convinced the world had rightly judged her and found her wanting. And she thought about the woman she was now, loved and valued, strong and clear-eyed, building a life on her own terms. The door opened, interrupting her thoughts. Caleb stood there, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, smiling at her. "Thought you might want company," he said. Always, Martha replied, and meant it. They worked together in comfortable silence, Martha kneading bread, while Caleb organized supplies and cleaned equipment. It was ordinary and domestic, and exactly the life Martha had stopped believing she could have. When the morning's baking was done and the bakery was ready to open, they stood together by the window, watching Mill Creek wake up. "Thank you," Martha said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me when no one else would. For being patient while I learned to believe I was worth seeing. For choosing me." Caleb set down his coffee and pulled her into his arms. "You were always worth seeing. I just happened to be looking at the right time." "No," Martha said, pulling back to look at him. "You were looking at the right way. That's the difference." They stood there, holding each other, while the sun rose higher and people began to move through the streets outside. Tommy ran past the window, late for school, waving at them as he went. Mrs. Henderson walked by with her shopping basket. The town lived and moved and continued around them. And Martha realized something. She was part of it now. Not separate, not hiding, but part of the fabric of this place. She had a husband who loved her, a business that thrived, friends who valued her. She had a life.
Are you happy?
Caleb asked, like he could read her thoughts. Martha thought about the question, about all the ways she'd been unhappy, all the years she'd spent believing she didn't deserve happiness. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm happy." And she was. Not perfectly, not without shadows of old fears or moments of doubt, but genuinely, deeply happy in a way she'd never been before. They opened the bakery for the day. Customers came and went. Tommy stopped by after school for his cookie. Reverend Shaw picked up bread for a church meeting. Life continued in its small, important ways. That evening, as Martha and Caleb walked home together, she thought about the carved bird that still sat on her shelf. She'd never asked Caleb about it directly, never questioned what it meant. "The bird you carved me," she said. "The first one. You said it was something beautiful people overlook. I remember. Did you know then that you'd fall in love with me?" Caleb thought about it. "I knew I saw something worth knowing better. Something worth staying for. Whether that was love or just curiosity, I couldn't say." He smiled. "But I'm glad I stayed to find out." "Me too." They reached their home as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Inside, a fire waited to be lit, dinner to be made, an evening to be shared. Tomorrow would bring more bread to bake, more work to do, more of the small moments that made up a life. But tonight, Martha stood on her porch with her husband, looking out at the valley she'd lived in her whole life, and she felt at peace. She'd spent so many years believing she was the problem, believing the world had judged her correctly and found her lacking, believing she deserved loneliness and shame. But Caleb had looked at her and said 7 words that changed everything. "You were never the problem." And slowly, painfully, beautifully, Martha had learned to believe him. She wasn't the problem. She never had been. She was just a woman who'd been hurt and who'd learned to protect herself by making herself small. A woman who'd forgotten her own worth, but who'd found the courage to reclaim it. And now she was a woman who was loved, who loved in return, who took up space without apology. "Ready to go in?" Caleb asked. "In a minute." Martha looked out at the darkening valley, at the lights beginning to appear in Mill Creek's windows, at the life she'd built despite everything. "I was thinking," she said, "maybe we should hang that carved bird in the bakery, where people can see it." "Why?" "Because maybe someone else needs to be reminded that just because people overlook something doesn't mean it isn't beautiful, doesn't mean it isn't valuable." She turned to look at Caleb. Maybe someone else needs to hear that they were never the problem. Caleb's expression softened. "That's a good idea. We could put a little sign under it. Something simple. What would it say?" Martha thought about it. About all the words that had hurt her over the years, all the judgments and assumptions and cruelties, and about the one phrase that had set her free. "You were never the problem," she said. "Just that. So whoever needs to hear it knows." "Perfect," Caleb said and kissed her gently. They went inside together, into the home they'd built, the life they'd chosen, and the carved bird that Caleb had made one winter day, seeing in Martha something beautiful that others had overlooked, waited to find its new place. a place where it could be seen, where it could remind others that sometimes the world is wrong and we're exactly who we're meant to be. Outside, the stars came out one by one over Mill Creek. Winter would come again, as it always did, bringing cold and darkness and the need to huddle close to survive. But Martha wasn't afraid. She'd survived worse. She'd survived years of believing she was worthless and emerging to discover she'd been wrong. She could survive anything now, and better than survive, she could thrive. In the warmth of her home, with her husband beside her and her life stretching out ahead full of possibility, Martha Thorne closed her eyes and felt grateful for pain that had made her strong, for loneliness that had taught her her own company was enough, for a mountain man who'd seen past the surface to the woman beneath, and most of all, for learning that she'd been carrying shame that had never belonged to her, that she'd been beautiful all along, even when the world said otherwise, that she'd always been enough. She was never the problem. She never had been. And now, finally, she believed it.